Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield 3 minutes to the former chairman of the Ag Committee, Mr. Goodlatte.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentlewoman for yielding. I thank her and the gentleman from Oklahoma for their leadership in attempting to address this issue. Even though we bring a bill to the floor under a closed rule with no opportunity, not only on the floor of the House, but also in the House Agriculture Committee, to mark up a bill that proposes to make food safer. Unfortunately, this bill does little, if anything, to enhance food safety. The legislation does not require the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to spend one additional penny on the inspection of food. Yet the legislation imposes significant regulatory burdens on small businesses without properly holding the regulatory agency accountable. The bill contains an expanded registration requirement that effectively creates a federal license to be in the food business. Like the Democrat stimulus bill, cap and trade, and the proposed health care bill, this is another example of broadening the size and scope of government, raising new taxes on small businesses, and intruding in the private lives of Americans. On-farm performance standards. New language added to the bill would exclude row crop producers from FDA regulatory authority over growing and harvesting of crops. Language was also improved that would relieve livestock producers from some of the burdens of the law. Although these are needed changes, they do not go far enough to make the bill acceptable. This bill still leaves our nation's fruit and vegetable producers subject to objectionable regulatory burdens. We can still expect to have an agency of the federal government telling our farmers how to do their jobs. Registration of food processing facilities was originally envisioned as a common-sense way of helping the FDA identify facilities under the Bioterrorism Act of 2002. This provision turns registration into a federal license for any food business to operate by charging exorbitant fees, making it unlawful to sell food without a registration license, and allowing the FDA to suspend a company's registration. Traceability is another issue. It does not make food safer. Traceability simply adds enormous regulatory burden without even knowing if it can be done in the first place. There is no requirement that the system developed by the FDA be feasible or affordable. Record keeping. Broad record-keeping authorities will impose significant regulatory burdens. Minimal consideration is given to risks associated with the product produced at the regulated facility when developing the record-keeping requirements. The language lacks protections from disclosure of proprietary information. The issue of quarantine authority. The bill's quarantine authority allows the Food and Drug Administration to quarantine a geographic area if there is credible evidence that food possesses a health risk. No consideration is given to economic losses suffered by food producers, processors, or distributors in the quarantine area. It's my understanding that the ranking member of the Agriculture Committee will offer something that will help to correct that later on, and I hope everyone will support that measure. Mr. Speaker, I would ask if the gentlewoman would yield an additional minute.
Absolutely. Thank you. I will, Mr. Speaker. Another minute.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
In particular, the FDA ultimately lifts the quarantine for lack of confirmatory evidence. The agency has no obligation, authority, or means to indemnify producers for their losses. Conversely, under the authority of the Animal Health Protection Act and Plant Protection Act, the USDA, which has jurisdiction over other sectors of our food safety and has done an outstanding job, it must indemnify producers who have incurred such losses. The language allows the FDA to act on suspicion to require a producer to cease distribution of food. Once again, no consideration is given in this legislation to indemnification for economic damages, particularly if the FDA was wrong. From a public health and safety point of view, end product testing offers little protection or assurance. HACCP was introduced as a system whereby the manufacturer evaluates their process and institutes site and process-specific controls rather than attempt to detect problems by testing the finished product. That is the better way to go. Mr. Speaker, I would urge my colleagues to oppose this rule, this closed rule, and this bad bill.
The gentleman from Virginia's time has expired. The gentlelady from North Carolina reserves